Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Town, and I serve as the President and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities. To those of you who attended day one of Power the Disability Vote Summit, welcome back. And to our new attendees, we are so glad that you're here. To kick us off this morning, I would like to introduce AAPD Board Chair and longtime disability advocate, Ted Kennedy Jr. Ted, take it away.
Thank you, Maria, and welcome to day two of the AAPD Rev Up Power the Disability Vote Summit, a groundbreaking event for the disability community. As Maria just said, my name is Ted Kennedy Jr. I'm board chair of the American Association of People with Disabilities, and I'm honored to participate in this historic forum. I've been asked just to provide some brief introductory remarks about this forum and the impact of this forum and the goal of this forum, but just being present at this forum, together with so many of the leading disability rights activists and organizations from across the United States, makes me proud to be a person with a disability. And although we're very diverse and represent many different constituencies, we're all here and united because of our common belief that people with disabilities want a shot at the American dream. We want to be a part of the community, and we want the same rights and opportunities as all other Americans. So we need political leaders who understand our history and our movement and our struggle as a civil rights movement. We need political leaders who know that we need supports and services such as job training, physical therapy, and personal care attendance in order to be productive and independent. We need political leaders. We use the terms such as exclusion or the words such as dignity and self-determination and respect and empowerment. And when we object to being depicted as objects of pity and charity, and when we talk about being housed and educated in separate institutions, as if we had some kind of contagious illness, we need political leaders who know what these ideas mean. That is what this forum is all about, harnessing the power of the disability vote. And Rev Up has just done a terrific job in organizing this forum. In this forum, I think, is not just about not about advancing the needs of some narrow interest group. We've heard time and time again during this summit from representatives from Rutgers that this is on the contrary, that in fact there's over 40 million eligible voters with a disability. And I hope that all of you will also participate in the National Disability Voter Registration Week, which will take place this year from July 13th to July 17th, 2020. There's a couple of organizations that I just want to give a shout out to and gratitude and thanks for all that you've done to make this forum possible. The ARC of the United States, Supermajority, Esquire Bank, SCI, ANCOR, ASAN, and the World Institute on Disability. We're reminded during this forum that 1 in 3 senior citizens have some kind of functional impairment. 70% of us will need long-term cares and services and supports at some time in our lives. What are our political leaders going to do to ensure that we have access to those services? And the baby boomer retirement is just beginning. So independent living services are already underfunded. So in my view, we have already reached crisis proportions for many of these programs and services, to independence and equality for people with disabilities. 66 million caregivers who provide support to individuals with disabilities, most of them unpaid and are women. We can harness this incredible political constituency to advance the goals of the disability rights movement. My family, as many of you on the phone know, disability rights and inclusion have been part of the life mission of the Kennedy family, going back to when my Uncle Jack was president in the early 1960s, prompted by my Aunt Rosemary, who was born with an intellectual disability and really sparked my family's involvement in this movement. They saw firsthand, as many family members do, how often she was ignored and excluded and never got invited to the movies with a friend. Just the systematic misunderstanding and stereotype affected her and impacted my family's energy and involvement in this area. I joined this community myself in 1973 when I lost my leg to bone cancer, and now I'm proud to be a disability rights attorney. So finally, I just want to express my appreciation and respect to all the forum's participants, in particular the Democratic and Republican candidates for office and their representatives who've taken the time to contribute to this two-day event. Historically, disability rights have benefited from strong bipartisan support. My dad, the late Senator Kennedy, frequently crossed the aisle to work closely with many of his Republican colleagues to pass IDEA, the ADA, Medicaid expansion, and many other state laws. So I hope that we can provide opportunities to work together in a collaborative way to advance the disability rights cause. This forum is not the end. It's a beginning. And now it's my honor and opportunity to turn this program over to Bob Kafka, longtime activist with National ADAPT, disability rights organizer for over 50 years, and coordinator for RevUp's campaign with AAPD. So again, thank you very much for asking me to provide some brief introductory remarks. And on behalf of AAPD and RevUp, thank you and welcome to day 2 of the Power the Disability Vote Summit.
Thanks, Ted. Yeah, you know, I didn't think I had a lot in common with you, Mr. Kennedy, but I became a person with a disability in 1973 also. So both are longtime disability rights activists, and I'm proud that we're working together. You know, the title of the summit really talks about what RevUp is about, power. Power is the ability to get and make social change, and how, like other civil rights groups, we are doing that. We protest in the streets. We pass legislation. Now we have to get that legislation into real policy action, and that's what RevUp is about. RevUp is register, educate, vote, use your power. It started in 2015. It was a kickoff event in Houston, Texas. It was with the backdrop of the 25th ADA 25, with the Road to Freedom bus as a backdrop. And we kicked off, and RevUp Texas was one of the first RevUp state disability voting coalitions in the country. What has been amazing with the coordination of AAPD over those 5 years, that one has evolved into 32 state coalitions. And one of the goals of this summit is to build RevUp so that, like Ted so inspiringly just said, that we can change the issues that are so affecting people with disabilities. It is not a coincidence that we are holding this, started yesterday on the anniversary of the Supreme Court Olmstead decision, and now moving towards National Disability Voter Registration Week. We have made a commitment, and yesterday's workshop showed our intersectionality, but we have made a commitment to work together to make the disability vote count. You know, I don't want to say that we've been tokenized, but for the years, we were satisfied with a disability policy on a website. There never was the sort of sane event. We weren't mentioned on the campaign street. There were not people with visible disabilities involved in the campaigns. Since RevUp started, that has changed. Just the fact that we have representatives from both the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign tells you that the RevUp and AAPD has started to build the power to bring about the changes that we want. You know, today we have two exciting panels, one RevUp and some of the RevUp state coalitions around there, and then another panel on the resources that you can use, both state and governmental, that could help you in the event. It has just been, it's really unbelievably exciting to be part of this. Many of you who know me may have seen me on the street protesting, getting arrested with the DAP, fighting for our rights. That is still part of what we need to do. But like what we call about the pitchfork, the social change, we need to take direct action, legislation, but now our challenge is to do the grunt work at the grassroots level and start changing federal, state, and local policy. And the only way to do that is to get our population out. And that's what this summit is about. I'm going to turn it over to what I call the dynamic duo, our MCs for the day, Emily Landau and Kings Floyd. And like I said yesterday, I don't know who's Batman and who's Robin, but we'll let them describe it. Thank you very much, and get out and vote, as like Justin Dart said, because our life depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you, and welcome back, everyone. I'm Emily Landau.
I'm Kings Floyd, and it is wonderful to have you all back here today, as well as new and exciting faces. We are excited to say we have a full day of exciting panels, events, and candidate participation. We want to remind everyone that this is a virtual platform and it reaches you in your environment. So please feel free to operate in whatever method you need to. Our goal is to find the most accessible space and make it come to you. This event is being recorded, so you will have access to any programming you would miss or would like to revisit.
A note to everyone, if you can stay for a few extra minutes at the end, we're going to have an additional segment. It'll be a recorded video and a surrogate from President Trump's campaign. Keep in mind, we're going to have a 10-minute break in the middle of our afternoon. And just want to ask everyone as we get started to share in the chat and on social media, have you been reflecting on any of the points that were made during yesterday's event? Can you tell us what stuck with you? Can you tell us something that surprised you or something you didn't know? Let us know. We want to know what really resonated with you from yesterday. So to start off our exciting second day, I have the privilege of welcoming Claire and Erica from the ARC to give us a glimpse into the current climate of our nation and how the census has been affected by the coronavirus. So the ARC plays a key role in advocating for and with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities at the federal, state, and local level. So the information and the actions you can take that'll stem from this conversation will play a tremendous role in how we as a community can step forward in the midst of these unique times. So take it away, Claire and Erica.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the welcome, Emily. I'm Claire Manning. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Mobilization at the ARC of the United States. My pronouns are she and hers. I am very excited to be with you all today to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the census, and definitely a very important 2020 topic. Big thank you to Rev Up and to AAPD for the invitation to be with you all today. I'm excited also to be joined by my colleague and friend, Erica Hudson. I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Claire, and hi everyone. Good afternoon or today. I'm a public policy analyst with the National Disability Rights Network, who's had the absolute pleasure of working with Claire and her team at the ARC and making sure that our advocacy efforts on the census get heard. So excited to be joining you all today.
Thank you, Erica. So before we kind of dive in, I want to just take a quick step back and share that you're hearing from the ARC and from NDRN today, but there are so many organizations all across the country and individuals who are doing incredible work to make sure that people with disabilities are counted in the census during a really difficult time. So today, we just have a short time together, but don't worry, Eric and I are gonna get you all the information you need to know exactly what's going on with the census as it relates to the disability community and how to take action. So up first, we are going to do kind of a quick overview, a Census 201, to get everything you need to know about census and disability. Then I'm going to turn it over to Erica to talk about any implications on census operation from the pandemic that's happening. We'll jump into some frequently asked questions, kind of the game show part where I basically ask questions and Erica answers them. And then we'll open it up to any questions that you all might have, or if there's anything that you want to share about work that you or an organization that you're part of has been doing around census outreach. First up, great place to start with a presentation on the census is, what is the census? So every 10 years, the federal government seeks to count every single person living in the United States. Fun fact about the census is that it is actually the largest peacetime mobilization that we have as a country. So it is an incredibly huge operation. This year, the majority of households have already received their invitation to respond to the 2020 census. So for example, I got mine in March. They were kind of mailed out typically for the first few months of the year. This year, for the first time ever, you can respond to the census online, in addition to being able to respond to it by phone or by mail. Now, people with disabilities are considered a hard to count population by the US Census Bureau. There are several other groups or communities that are additionally considered hard to count. They include young children, immigrants, people of color, LGBTQ persons, and people experiencing homelessness. And this is really, really important because groups that are considered hard to count, what that basically means, according to the Census Bureau, is that they have a higher chance of not being included. And there's a lot of reasons you can probably imagine why people with disabilities are considered hard to count. I'm gonna go through a couple here. 1 in 5 people with disabilities live in an area that the area itself is considered hard to count by the Census Bureau. Of course, there may be accessibility issues with the census itself, with outreach around the census. And the last thing that I want to mention here is, of course, the intersectionality piece, that people with disabilities are part of all of the other hard to count populations that I just mentioned. So why does this matter? There is a lot at stake in the census. It's not just this random thing that happens, kind of bureaucratic thing that happens every 10 years. It is really important because the census directs 2 big things that matter. Well, lots more than that, but 2 big things that matter to people with disabilities. 1, federal funding. The census data can guide over $1.5 trillion in federal funding for key programs that support people with disabilities, things like Medicaid, housing, food assistance. Additionally, your state can actually gain or lose a congressional seat, depending on census data. So it is critical, because we know how many important decisions are made in Congress, that your state gets all of the votes that it deserves. I'm going to now turn it over to Erica to give us the latest on what's going on with census and the pandemic.
Yes, thank you so much, Claire. That was a fantastic synopsis of kind of what this all entails, and we're so excited to talk with you all a little bit more about it as it relates to COVID-19 and kind of what's at stake moving forward. As of today, on June 23rd, super excited to say that the national self-response rate is 61.6%, meaning over 50% of American households have said, I count in the U.S. Census, which is so cool. But as you can tell, we have a ways to go, as we want every single person who lives in the United States to be counted. And it's this beautiful thing where we all count and we all have a responsibility to make sure that we do so. Now, because of COVID, some impact has happened, and the Census Bureau, as a result, has had to adjust some of its 2020 census operation to not only protect the health and safety of the Census Bureau staff, but also to protect all of us as well. But the big picture, I think, here is to say is that you can still respond to the 2020 census, because the deadline has been extended to October 31st. So we still have time to say, I count, and look at the operational adjustments that lie ahead and what we can all do. So if we look at the next slide, you can see that we do have a self-response phase that started all the way back in March, like Claire mentioned, how she got a census mailer in the mail, was able to say, I count. I did the dance when I got mine. I was pretty stoked. I imagine Claire did the same thing, but I also understand that may not everyone be as hype as we are, but definitely come to our conversations if you want to talk about the census. They also have unique processes in place, including their ACOs, their area census offices. There's one in all the states all across the country that are working with folks to ensure that they're being counted and going through some of those unique processes, including the group quarters enumeration process that Claire and I are going to talk about a little bit. But just a big picture, if you live in a group quarters and you perhaps did not receive your census mailer, you'll be going through a different process, which has also been extended because of COVID-19. And then if you haven't self-responded to the census, the non-response follow-up will begin at the end of the summer in August, all the way again to that end of date, October 31st, when everyone will have to have responded to the census. But I think the big thing that Claire and I want to leave you with is, one, how cool the census is and how exciting it is, but that you can still respond to the 2020 census, and you can get your friends and family to also be counted in the 2020 census. So that's definitely something we want all you to keep in mind as we move forward here in the next couple of months. And with that, I'm excited that Claire and I are going to do an FAQ Jeopardy round for you all. So I'm going to pass it back to Claire, and we'll continue throughout this presentation talking about the census.
Thank you, Erica. I just want to share with everyone that Erica is not joking when she talks about how much she loves the census. I hope someday to be loved by someone the way that Erica loves the census. So just want to make that clear. Okay. Jeopardy round. Erica, are you ready?
Yes, let's do it.
Are disability-related questions on the 2020 census?
That is a great question. And the short answer here is no. There are no disability-related questions specifically asked on the 2020 census. But the Census Bureau has another survey where we do see these disability-related questions. That's on the American Community Survey that is sent every year to only a small percentage of the U.S. population, while the 2020 census is sent to everyone in the United States. But even though disability-related questions aren't asked on the census, it's still so important for all of us to participate and say that I count. As Claire mentioned in the beginning, there's so many things that are impacted by census data, and we have to make sure that we're counted in that as well.
Okay, Erica, next up. Is my 2020 census data safe? People are putting personal information on here. The census is asking a lot of questions. Is my data safe?
That's a great question and a really important question. And the answer is yes. Everyone's responses are safe and secure and protected by federal law. And that's really important, that the Census Bureau cannot share your personal information with anyone else. And the short answer here again is yes, but this is a really important question to make sure that everyone is comfortable with. And the Census Bureau and the ARC and NGRN has fantastic resources diving more in depth and to ensure folks that the data is secure. But again, the short answer to this great question is yes, it is secure.
Thank you. How are people living in group quarters, which I'm doing air quotes because group quarters is a census term, it's a term from the Census Bureau, like nursing homes, college dorms, or group homes, how are they counted in the 2020 census?
That's also a great question, Claire. And I think it's fair to say that you and I, as we work on census, this is a question that we get a lot. And it's somewhat confusing and it's a very intricate process. But the simple answer here is that the Census Bureau has a unique process for counting folks that live in group quarters. Places that are perhaps owned by a third party, maybe like a group home or a college dorm. And to make it easier for folks, the Census Bureau works directly with group quarters or nursing home administrators, if you will, to make sure that all their residents are being counted. And there's different ways the Census Bureau and the group quarter administrator does that perhaps can be through electronic data sharing, or it could be that census takers are in fact coming to the group quarters and handing out some of these questionnaires so they can have that in-person interaction. It varies based on each group quarter and based on each individual group quarter. So college dorms might be different, nursing homes or group homes might be different, but the important thing here is to emphasize that of course people living in group homes are also counted in the 2020 census. And if people have questions about this, they for sure should talk to their group quarters administrators, where they can reach out to folks like Claire and I to make sure that they're being counted in the 2020 census.
How can I get involved?
Ooh, well, you just participating today is a huge step. And as Claire, as I mentioned, we would love to talk to anyone about 2020 census and how we can resource share and how we can post on social media or send emails or just talk about it at virtual events like this, or just simple word of mouth. I think now with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of our things have had to shift to virtual events. But again, we have this beautiful thing to share that we can all come together and really say that I count in the 2020 census. And there's definitely plenty of resources out there. The ARC has some absolutely incredible videos that I would love just to highlight, but have Claire talk more about. There's the Census Counts campaign, which is led by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, that talk and have all of these resources. NGRN has some resources about the accessibility of the 2020 census. And I think to emphasize that you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's so many information and resources out there that you can use and share with your friends and family. And a simple tweet or an Instagram post can really make a difference. I had a friend that reached out to me saying they highlighted that folks need to respond to the census, and they had someone come back to them and say, hey, because I saw your Instagram post, I responded to the 2020 census. That kind of stuff makes my day, and I think that is so cool. And we have so much more work to do to ensure that every single person in the United States is counted, and that's where you all come in. But I am going to share it back to Claire now, as they have some incredible resources on the ARC's webpage as well that she is a little bit more familiar about than I am.
Yes, feel free. Thanks, Erica. Feel free to check out the arc.org/census. We have materials that are available in plain language that we worked with ASAN on to create. We also have video, and all of our materials are available in Spanish and in English, so feel free to check them all out at the arc.org/census. The group homes fact sheet that Erica mentioned is also on our website. We have some webinars that we've done with NDRN and with other organizations. Feel free to use any of those resources to get counted. This is one of Erica's memes to show how much she loves
really
census.
enjoyed having some creativity with the census. Not to say that I'm the best, but you know, it just makes sense to talk about it. Okay, this might be old, but on the screen there's a meme of Joey Tribbiani. I don't know if anyone's a Friends fan here, but it says, I self-responded to the 2020 census. Have you? And if not, again, you can still respond to the 2020 census if you have questions or concerns. I know Claire and I are super excited to answer them, and we're happy to share our emails to make sure that you feel comfortable and you know what's going on in the 2020 census. But I think Claire and I really just want you all to be counted. and to participate in this really incredible thing where we kind of create a snapshot of the United States for the next 10 years.
We'll pause there and see if there's any questions from you all, or if there's anything that you want to share about census outreach that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Claire and Erica, and also my apologies. I introduced you both as being from the ARC, but I recognize Erica is actually from NDRN, but hey, you're both awesome disability organizations. So I am really, really excited to have some questions from the audience. There are a bunch of questions. So let's start out. How do you think that coronavirus, actually, you know what? How do you think coronavirus is going to influence the current and future elections, and especially as it relates, you know what? That's a question from yesterday. Ha ha ha. We're just dealing with technical difficulties all over the place, my friend.
No worries.
It is okay.
I was prepping an answer. That was going to be a
you know
tough
what?
one.
You could, if you had answered, I would have said that's very impressive, and way to go with the flow. So the census asks all sorts of questions regarding race. How is it possible to get disability as part of the census? There you go. There's the census question.
That's a great question, and I will definitely hand it over to Claire as well. As to my understanding, the disability community has worked really hard on this to want to create this snapshot of disability in the United States. And there's a lot of different areas where we get our disability data, right? The CDC has announced that 1 in 4 people in the United States have a disability. The Census Bureau has reported similar data through that American Community Survey. And as of right now, to my understanding, the best area where we can get our disability data from the Census Bureau is through the American Community Survey, which happens every year, and it's sent to about 2.5% of U.S. households, which again is different from U.S. Census because that's sent to every single household every 10 years. But this is a question that I know Claire and I have had. What can we do to ensure that in our next census, so 2030, which is like super weird to think, if we can get some of our disability questions on there. And I think that's advocacy work that we all can do together to highlight the importance of including people with disabilities and having some of this data become front and center perhaps in the decennial census. But that's a great point and something that I think we should all work for here in the next 10 years, which sounds really weird, but I think that's what we're looking at in terms of the decennial census. Claire?
I think that's a great answer, Erica, but I was also going to say that I think it can kind of maybe help folks doing outreach around census to kind of, if we had questions about disability on the census, one of the biggest questions that we get all the time is, why does this matter if it doesn't include a disability question? And you know now, right, these 2 big reasons, and there's others, but I think having a question about disability will really make it even more obvious to people why this matters.
Totally.
So this is a question to you both, and kind of along the same lines of identifying different identities. In the census, there's a choice of picking male or female. How do you suggest people who identify as a transgender, queer, or agender get counted in 2020, and what is a way to affect change in that regard?
Erica, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. And I so appreciate, sorry, I don't know who asked that, but that's a fantastic point. And that's something that brings concern to many of us. And unfortunately, there were things in place to make this change. But then unfortunately, to have more options for people, as of course not everyone identifies in just 2 categories. And these aren't conversations we need to have, but unfortunately, because of certain administration procedures that were taken in place, that's why on the 2020 census, we only unfortunately see those 2 options. I would love to highlight the National LGBT Task Force, who does absolutely incredible Census Week. And it's actually LGBTQ Week, Sense of Action right now, which is so cool that this question came up. And we want to make this change for the next decade and as well in the 2020 census. Fortunately, with the 2020 census, we did see some adjustments on relationship status. so folks can identify in that field when they're responding how they are related to someone in the household, that they are perhaps in a same-sex couple household as well. But my personal perspective is that just only does a little bit, because we don't have this really inclusive thing that we're talking about, and that does need to be changed. And I would love for Claire to talk more about it, but I really appreciate folks bringing that up, and that's something that we need to continue pushing the Census Bureau to change, because like this individual who asked this question, we don't all just identify as male or female, and then there's this really broad, beautiful spectrum of things. So what we can do as the disability community is come together and really advocate for change in this. And I think that's an awesome way to start as well with that. But Claire, I will also pass it to you, as I know you've done great work on this.
Thanks. I think it's a really important question. And we struggled with this a lot when we were creating materials, because we wanted to make it clear that we also didn't agree that there were only two options, but that also this is what is on the census. So I can't remember the exact phrasing that we came up with, but it was something like, the census only gives two options, you know, to make it clear that there are more options, but these are the two we have, unfortunately, on this form right now. But as Erica said, there's a lot more advocacy that needs to be done around that. But I'm so excited that that question came in during this week of action.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question, and I would love to ask you both about plain language. What about accessibility of the census? Is there an organization that's already worked on creating a more accessible plain language version for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or is this something that's in the works?
That's a great question. Erica, I can start and talk about our materials, and then if you have anything to add about the forum in general. From the ARC side, I mentioned this very, very briefly, but we put together materials that lay out all of the different questions that are asked on the census, and we did them in plain language. We worked with ASAN on that, and so those are all available on our website. Our videos are also in plain language. As I mentioned, they're in English and Spanish. I don't know about movements for the census form accessibility. I'm not sure. Erica, do you have any info on that?
We're working with the Census Bureau on that, I think, is the quickest way, because this is something, unfortunately, we think personally that they have overlooked and forgotten about. I think phrasing that we see a lot of the time, and this is something we've brought up to the Census Bureau multiple times, and we're hoping that they'll really engage in this conversation. And I'll just add to that too, if I can just highlight the ARC's resources, because they're amazing that they work together with ASAN. And then on the overall aspect of accessibility with the census is really important as well. So looking at the online option that's available, the Census Bureau has to ensure that they're following Section 508 guidelines to make sure that it is fully accessible for perhaps screen readers or any other type of assistive devices, that the telephone option is also accessible for those who might be deaf or hard of hearing. They're currently using TTD technology, which in our view perhaps isn't the most updated system, which again is why we're working with the Bureau to make sure that they're keeping up to date on what is most accessible for everyone. And then also that the mail questionnaire that's available, that there's a Braille and large print language guide that's available to folks. And on that aspect, I just want to emphasize that unfortunately it's only a language guide in Braille in large print. It's not the actual paper questionnaire that someone can then return in the mail. It's just a guide where someone can follow along and then have to complete the standard print next to it, which is someone who would greatly benefit from the large print. I think that's great, but I would personally not be able to fill out the regular standard questionnaire because I'm visually impaired, so I think there are some gaps there personally, and I think as emphasized as perhaps the Census Bureau doesn't necessarily always have the best resources available, but I think it's fair to say that they're trying, but they need to hear from all of us. And this is a really great way for all of us to not only say I count and self-respond to the 2020 census, but also bring this advocacy, because we want to support everyone in our community and we need to see the change, and there's so many things that we can do in this aspect of it. So I encourage everyone to get involved and continue to ask these great questions that you're doing today to make sure that all of the voices are being heard in the 2020 census and beyond.
Erica and Claire, thank you so much for highlighting the value of not only the disability vote, but how we can put ourselves forward and take action to be part of efforts around the census, especially during such a challenging time. So it's a really, really great reminder for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
So I have a question for everyone who's tuning in. Can you tell us a little bit about your voting game plan as we're about to transition into talking more about voting? We'd love to hear how that's changed during recent events and how you might be supporting and encouraging other people to either register to vote or get out the vote. So tell us in the chat, tell us on social media. We'd love to hear from you. And next, we're going to transition to another panel. The Rev Up campaign works to increase voter registration and engagement by working to eliminate barriers to the polls and voter suppression. So multiple states have taken the initiative to build a coalition for their own state as movement in the realm of the disability vote has grown. So we are going to introduce now a dynamic panel including reps from Texas, New Jersey, Florida, and Massachusetts who are all involved in Rev Up, and they're going to offer insight into their own experiences around developing coalitions and share advice for how you can do the same. And they're also going to be joined by Crip the Vote, which, as many of you following along on social media know, is a leader in the use of media around disability advocacy. And they're going to offer some practical advice that you can use to incorporate social media and other forms of media into the development of your state's coalition. So I will now turn it over to Carrie Gray, who will be moderating this panel. Take it away, Carrie.
Thanks, Emily. Well, hi again to everyone, and thanks for joining us on day 2 of the summit. As was mentioned, my name is Carrie Gray, and I'm the lead on voting and Rev Up at AAPD. I'm very excited to moderate this conversation today. As we know, this entire summit is about voting, civic engagement, making sure that we recognize the power and representation of our community. And so 2020 has been quite a year. For a lot of different reasons. And so in the midst of us encouraging our community to get registered to vote and making sure that they stay engaged, I think one of the things that's important is for us to talk about how do we mobilize our community. Right? So we can talk about this on an individual level of folks voting, of folks getting involved and speaking their truth and making sure that they're getting represented. But another piece to this conversation is how do we work together as a community? How do we mobilize entire neighborhoods or entire groups of people to ensure that they understand their rights, what's available, and that they get to the polls? So I'm excited to be sharing this conversation with not just myself, but a group of folks that are really going to get us involved in this. So I'm excited. Please help me welcome Greg with Crip the Vote, Debbie with Rev Up Florida, Marlene with Rev Up Massachusetts, Luke with Rev Up New Jersey, and Bob with Rev Up Texas. Thank y'all for joining me today. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with the first question. I'm going to kind of go down the line and see if folks can give some introductions. I'll actually start with Bob, if that works. I'm wondering if you could introduce yourself, your state, and if you just get us started with, how did you get started in organizing the disability vote?
Thank you, Carrie. My name is Bob Kapka. I'm with Rev Up Texas, based in Austin, Texas. It came out of, it evolved. I was working with Adaptive Texas and thought that there needed to be some, movement towards voting. So we started the Disability Voting Action Project. And that went on for a while, and realized that that is mostly known for direct action, and also there were limitations. So what we did was we brought together a group of organizations, actually starting with working with our P&A, Disability Rights Texas, and our state coalition, the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities. And realized that there was quite a bit of resources that we all had that, referred to voting, and that we could come together as a state, various different organizations, cross disability, very following the independent living principles of, working with all interests. And amazingly, I think of voting very similar to how the disability community came together with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So much of our stuff is siloed into self-interest by disability population, and frequently there are few things that bring us all together. ADA was one of those, but voting is also where we all have a similar interest to work together towards bringing about social change. And the timing was just perfect. We were having a state election, and all the groups came together. We involved the our Texas State Independent Living Council, and all the centers, Texas Developmental Disability Community, our mental health group, also our groups that worked in the blind community and the deaf community. And we created what was called the Texas Disability Issues Forum, and we've held 2 of them doing that. And so Rev Up Texas actually, really, because taking all the various, resources, we don't have staff, we don't have tons of money, but what we did was capture the passion that we all had to be more influential in politics. And we realized also that it isn't just the national, it's actually all politics are local. That was a thing that Tip O'Neill, famous speaker from Massachusetts, said, and it's really true. And in point of fact, we can have actually probably even more influence at local and state, city councils, school boards, things like that. And then the other thing we did was we defined the disability vote, not just people with disabilities. We came up with this visual, the pebble in the pond, where the disabled person obviously is the focus, but like when you throw a pebble in the pond, there's all these ripples. So there's family members, advocates, providers, professionals, even bureaucrats, because people, very much like advocacy, vote because of self-interest. So that's how Rev Up Texas started, and we've had 2 Disability Issues Forum, and we've been working very closely with AAPD and that to help bring this into a national. And really, I really want to commend AAPD that working with us actually has taken, the Rev Up concept and really has made it a national branded thing, that Rev Up is the disability vote.
Super appreciate that. I'm going to ask the same question to Luke. I'm curious if you can introduce yourself and if you could tell us how you got started in organizing around the disability vote.
Thanks, Carrie. Appreciate that. I'm Luke Kopish. I'm the Deputy Director of the Alliance Center for Independence. We're one of 11 independent living centers in New Jersey. And so we assist people with disabilities in Middlesex, Union, and Somerset counties. We've been working on voting for years and years and years. My colleague and myself, Carol Tonks, and I worked at the New Jersey Developmental Disabilities, where we organized voting workshops and did polling place accessibility surveys and register people with developmental disabilities to vote. So we were huge on getting people actively involved with voting and issues that are important for people with disabilities when it comes to elections. So we carry that work through at our present job at the Alliance Center for Independence. And our good friend Bob Kafka got us involved with Rev Up, and it was a perfect fit for us. We did start in 2016 with the presidential election, where we work with other groups. We work with other disability organizations as well as our sister CILs in the county, but we also work with the New Jersey Developmental Disabilities Council as well as the New Jersey's Protection and Advocacy Program, which is now called Disability Rights New Jersey. We did get grants from them to put events on that were presented by RevUp at the State House, where we launched a kickoff event on the disability vote and the importance of the disability vote in conjunction with the National Disability Voter Registration Week in the summer of 2016. So we've been doing this for 4 years now. Every year it's grown. Every year our coalition of people involved in our efforts has grown. We, like I said, we work closely with the other independent living centers who now are realizing the importance of voting. So we increased our numbers on the number of people we registered, the number of people who are actively involved with participating in the election process. And I also want to thank the AAPD for the candidate surveys that they put together, which we promoted. We made calls. We asked people, or the candidates that we are in contact with, to fill out the surveys. And in addition to this, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but we organize candidate forums, candidate meet and greets, and we feel it's important for people with disabilities to meet and learn from the candidates seeking office, but also almost as important, or even more importantly, for the candidates to learn from people with disabilities about the issues that they face and their experiences. So it's interesting to see how candidates evolved in their thinking about disabilities, because we've been meeting with them. We are engaging with them, and it's become to the point where some legislators and politicians have come to us first and say, hey, when are you having that Rev Up event? I want to be part of it. I want to speak. So that's really how it's involved. And again, we want to thank Bob for the opportunity to be part of this nationwide effort.
Appreciate it. Great. So I'm going to ask a similar question to Debbie. So one, I'm going to ask if you can introduce yourself. And then two, I know that many of us are starting to get into the organizing process of the disability vote and just getting, things started. Sometimes our work evolves over time and we learn how to get to know things better, and we get a little better at the work in which we do. So I'm wondering if you can introduce yourself, and you can also talk about, your starting point and how your work has evolved over time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carrie. I'm so excited to be here today. Hi, my name is Debbie Dietz, and I am from Miami, Florida. I work at a nonprofit advocacy center for disability rights called Disability Independence Group, or DIG for short. And we had a fun, interesting, organic way of how our chapter started. It started in the summer of 2018. And in our state of Florida, we had two really big competitive races. One was for Senate and one was for our governor's race. And so groups all over the state were working independently on voting. And then we all started receiving information about the National Disability Voter Registration Week. And we all started talking about it separately throughout the state, and we were all calling AAPD National asking for help. And one of the people there said, well, all these people from Florida are calling, why don't you guys work together? And we said, yeah, we would love to work together. So it ended up being three of us, myself, and I'm in the southern part of the state, a self-advocate named Jason Haar, who's in the middle part of the state, And a gentleman named Tony DePalma, who is the Director of Public Policy at Disability Rights Florida, which is our protection and advocacy center, and he's in the northern part of the state. So we had all three parts of the state covered. We all came from different perspectives, and we decided to pool our resources and work together. And that was how our chapter started. We named ourselves Access the Vote Florida, or ATV Florida. And we did that because the PNA already had made that name for its voting website and had already started it. So we decided, let's build on the success and the foundation they had started and make it the state Rev Up chapter. So that's how we began. And now to answer the second part of your question, you're asking about how we evolved. Well, from 2018, we never stopped. We have just been growing and growing and evolving. And what we're doing now is we're meeting weekly. Every Friday, 11 a.m., we have a statewide telephone call, and we rotate the topics. We made 3 working groups. So we have a voter engagement working group, we have a state engagement working group, and we have a candidate engagement working group. And so every week we rotate the different groups, and then the 4th meeting we do a statewide meeting and compare notes on all the working groups. And then we continue the cycle so that we're breaking the work apart and we're working together and we're building the movement. We also created a communications committee separate. As everyone's saying, social media is going to be key. So we actually built a team just to focus on how we want to get out our message and how we can share our information. We've rebranded the website, Access the Vote Florida. It's going live the first week of July, and we made a logo. And so we've got everything ready to really push out and promote ourselves through social media. So I hope that answers your questions, Carrie. Thank you so much.
Super appreciate that. That's very helpful. Marlene, I'm going to ask you the same question. One, I'm going to ask if you could introduce yourself. And then 2, I'm wondering if you could let us know about how your work has evolved since you first started doing disability voting work.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Marlene Sayo, and I am the Executive Director of the PNA in the state of Massachusetts. We're called Disability Law Center. I've been in this position now since March of 2018, and that's when I started my work as a disability voting rights advocate. Before that, I was actually served for many years as a legal observer during the elections down in Virginia. So I've always been passionate about voting rights and getting out the vote, and I brought that passion to what I'm doing now. Prior to my arrival here in Massachusetts, the Rev Up campaign had been set up in 2016, and a forum was held leading up into the presidential election back then. 2 months after arriving here in May of 2018, I held our first forum on voting rights issues across the state, where we worked closely not only with local officials. We had a representative from AAPD present, as well as one of the commissioners from the Election Assistance Commission down in Washington, D.C., and some local folks, including the Secretary of State's office, was part of that forum that we had to talk about the issues. We had self-advocates involved from the first day that I arrived, and we continued to work with our self-advocates as well as the National SABE organization to raise awareness about voting rights and to hear issues. We have over the past 2 years, I've really started to focus on how to get young adults involved in the voting process. Every summer since I go and I speak to, we have a statewide youth leadership forum for young adults with disabilities, and I present on voting rights, and I want to say that because of me, they're already registering to vote, but I would say a majority of them are already registered. And so it's great to be in the room and just talk about best ways to reach other young adults throughout the state. Early this year, I actually joined forces with some PhD students to come up with infographics that we can use to share on our social media accounts. But also, because I'm not as tech savvy as other individuals might be, how to learn how to use Instagram, maybe even come up with some TikTok videos to get the information out. And we continue to have our meetings every 2 weeks, those of us that are part of the Rev Up group. We were hoping we had a forum scheduled for May 29th, a statewide forum, but we had to cancel that sadly because of COVID. So we're now going to go virtual with the hope that we can set that up by the end of the summer and bring in folks and talk about the issues. But I think from an evolution perspective, it's trying to get other people involved that may not have been as involved in the past. Being a Latina, I'm trying to reach out to the Hispanic community to try to get individuals within the Hispanic community involved and working with other minority groups to raise awareness and make sure that folks are getting registered. And the greatest thing for me in Mass is that you can now register to vote using your cell phone. And so everywhere I go, I always pose a question regardless of any presentation I'm making. Are you registered to vote? And if not, would you be interested? And here, take my phone and go ahead and do it for you. And we've actually gotten some folks registered that way at some of our events. And this summer we'll be conducting our priority setting forums throughout the state, this time through video conferencing. And so part of the conversations we will be having is also to learn more about concerns as it applies to voting, especially because this year we will most likely have the option of also voting by mail. So it's important to have those conversations sooner rather than later. And I hope I answered your question.
No, definitely. That's very helpful. So now I'm going to turn it to Greg, one of our partners with the Rev Up Network. One, I'm wondering if you could, again, introduce yourself. And then two, I have a similar but different question. I'm wondering if you could give us some perspective on the strategies that you use in your work to engage in local and state elections. So the strategies that you may use or strategies that you may recommend for folks to use in engaging in elections.
Sure. I'm Greg Baraton, one of the co-organizers of Crypt the Vote. In my other life, I'm the Director of Advocacy at the Center for Disability Rights. Crypt the Vote has tried to engage on every level in elections. We've probably gotten the most attention for our work on federal elections with chats with national candidates, but I think one of the places where we've been most successful has been engaging state and local candidates. And I think you can see this simply with people reaching out and asking questions to candidates. We've had, we've had people tweet directly at candidates on every level, but the place we see the most response is often at the state and local level, because often those Twitter accounts, those Facebook accounts are actually manned or operated, by the candidates themselves. Whereas on a national level, it's usually a staffer who often feels the need to not connect with anyone just to push out the message that their boss wants. Whereas on the state and local level, we tend to see a lot of candidates, a lot of politicians actively engage with people. I've seen people use this on the local level to get something done about snow removal. I've seen this done on a state level to push through criminal justice reform, to help sort of get people out easier. We saw someone actually tweet to make sure there were actually accessible halfway houses for people so they could get out of prison, and got responses from politicians who helped work with them to arrange it. So I mean, I think there's a lot you can do. In the midterms, I was pushing something we called the Crypt the Vote Challenge, which was just reach out to your candidate on whatever level. The great thing about social media is that you can actively contact campaigns, candidates, politicians, and often get a response. And if you don't get a response, you can pile on the pressure because people are watching. This is a wonderful tool. I mean, often disabled people have been left out of these campaigns because to get contact with politicians, to get contact with candidates, you had to go and meet them. And now suddenly with social media, you can reach out to them from wherever you are and we're seeing people recognize that and respond. Social media is a wonderful tool, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I love the idea Marlene said of TikTok videos. I think that's a fantastic tool. I mean, I haven't used TikTok myself. I've seen some of the videos, but I think it's a great way to engage people, and you will start to see politicians on that platform because people are there. So, I mean, I think that's wonderful. It's also a useful tool for organizing on those levels. So we've connected on a statewide level here on campaigns to push issues into politicians' view. So right now in New York, there's issues with the consumer-directed personal assistance associate, being under threat, and so we've used social media to get into the faces of politicians, get them to commit to protecting the services that people depend on to live in the community, and I see that only growing as politicians get a bit more savvy on the internet, as we connect with more of the disability community, which is already incredibly vibrant online. As more of the disability community comes on and people are more savvy in how to use it, we can only see that influence, that power expanding.
Makes sense. Appreciate that, Greg. Thank you. I'm actually wanting to bring the entire panel into this, so anybody that wants to hop in. So along those lines of strategies that folks use to mobilize folks to register, I'm curious if folks also have additional thoughts on how do we empower people with disabilities to share information about the issues that matter most to them, whether that's within our networks and definitely to our elected officials. How do we encourage more folks to speak up about the issues?
This is Bob in Texas. One of the things we're doing to get people excited about National Disability Voter Registration Week is we're doing something very similar to what this two-day summit. We're doing an hour and a half Zoom meeting, bringing together all the information about National Disability Voter Registration and some of the other stuff Rev Up Texas is doing. That way we can try to, through the internet, to try to get people excited about National Disability Voter Registration Week. And what we're sending out information is, obviously because of COVID, getting together the usual voter registration tools we can't use. But for states like Texas, where there is no online vote, ability to register, we've been promoting the website www.register2vote.org, where you can actually online fill out the information, submit it online. They will send you a filled out voter registration with the correct return address. They have an envelope filled out. All you have to do is sign it and put it in the mail. And that's not just here in Texas. That can be done nationwide. And it's especially timely because of COVID, because obviously the usual way of doing voter registration is really difficult. And then the other thing we've been using is media. We've had public service announcements that we have put, that we're sending out. We bought a statewide media guide where we disseminate all the information, and we basically, we're a conservative state, and Rev Up is non-partisan, and we send information both to the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And to answer specifically the question about issues, is one of the things that concerns many 501c3s is, well, let's say all the Democrats voted good on ADA and all the Republicans didn't. what we say is you're not saying Democrat, Republican. You say this issue, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or Home and Community-Based Services, block grants, whatever, you know, have you done positive or negative? And, you know, I think people who are very timid about jeopardizing the 501c3, I emphasize, say, issue-oriented and not party. And that is a way that you can make your case. And because the independent living movement, the self-advocacy community, those in the SAVE, you know, everybody is always worried in these times about, you know, political correctness and not being brought over the line. So, you know, as long as we stay focused on specific issues, are you for us? Are you against us? I think, you know, we'd be safe. So that's what we're doing. And like I said, you know, this week we're actually doing that hour-and-a-half Zoom meeting to get people ginned up because National Disability Voter Registration Week is right around the corner. Thanks, Gary.
Can I add?
Definitely.
Okay, so we're finding that these weekly phone calls are becoming a regular safe place for people to hop on the call, either describe a problem they had and how they solved it, or this is the problem I'm having, do you have any help or suggestions? So we had a woman named Christine Rudd who had a problem with how she was trying to do her absentee ballot, and she explained the whole process of what she went through. And then another young woman from Tampa said, oh, that's so great. Now I can use what you've learned and apply it. And then we had our Florida Council of the Blind, who was really working on how they make the voting accessible, the vote by mail accessible. And they came online together and we're working and we're pooling our resources to really support them in working on their issue. And one third example, we had a woman named Carol Jones, who's a big advocate, and was on the phone call with someone else who's in her same community that she hadn't met yet. So we started making local links through our phone calls. So we're finding that as people know that this is the place to go and that we've invited our Centers for Independent Living and our State Independent Living Council, this is becoming the place to either get the answer to a question or share your solution with someone else. And we're finding it very positive.
Good. Can I add to this discussion? We from the get-go, we've had engaged people with disabilities speaking at a lot of our events, sharing their experiences, sharing advocacy tips on how to advocate for more voting, accessible voting, what to do if you're challenged at the polls. We work a lot with people with developmental and intellectual disabilities regarding voting. So there's a whole education around guardianship and voting. We have gone into developmental centers and other similar institutions and talked to staff as well as residents about the residents' right to vote and the procedures on how to vote. It's one thing to talk about their right to vote, but we also walk them through how do you vote? How do you register? And we also arrange for our Board of Elections to conduct voting machine demonstrations. And I think that's really important because people who, especially those who are voting for the first time, have this fear of using the machine, getting it wrong, not sure what to do, not sure how to ask for help. So we try to take away the mystique of voting by having these workshops, and I think that's engaging people and making voting more accessible. The one thing about politicians and legislators and people running for elected office is that we were taught this a long time ago, that politicians look at who is voting. And a lot of us were not paid attention to because we weren't voting in the same numbers as people without disabilities. I think our efforts at Rev Up and other organizations, Script the Vote, other places, other projects have increased that gap, but there still is a gap, and politicians know that we don't vote as much as we should. So, but it's coming around, and politicians realize that we are voting. We have that empowerment that we're exercising. So that's a great way to engage politicians or voters. The other thing I want to add is that we should not be just engaging legislators during election year. So we have good relations with our local legislators throughout the year on issues that are important to us. They've come to our office. They maybe another issue they're coming to meet with us, but they actually, in the meantime, they're meeting our constituents, they're meeting our volunteers, they're seeing what we do. So that really helps us in bridging that gap that a lot of people face when it comes to politicians and legislators. And like I said before, we've conducted forums. We have had senatorial candidates forums as well as congressional forums. We've also had candidates running for our governor, and they've come to our office. They sat with us. We've had lunch and learns with these candidates, and it really is helpful for us. And they remember us. And to have that relationship, that rapport, is very important. And to see people face to face, to shake hands, to get a photo op, I think that's really, that can't be underestimated.
That's very helpful. Thank y'all. So we have just a couple of minutes left, so I would love to get an audience question in. So shout out to everybody watching today. One of our audience questions is, what are some recommendations or advice from the Rev Up Quick to Vote network on voter registration drives or get out the vote for people in institutions or people in community housings? Any recommendations on that?
This is Bob. It's even more, it's very, very difficult because in the past, we used to go into the nursing homes when we were trying to do getting people out with money following the person, and we used voter registration as one of the reasons to get in. Now with COVID, that is not possible. So it really is, it's a real challenge in terms of that. The only sideway is maybe through outreaching through maybe the family members, that getting information to them, if they somehow can communicate to their person who may be in either a nursing facility or a group home or assisted living, but it's very, very difficult.
Yeah, I've got to agree with Bob. I think that what we've seen with the pandemic is that the ableism that was already ruling these institutions has only further locked people down and kept people from actively communicating with anyone. So I mean, some states still won't let anyone visit anyone in a nursing facility or group home. It's difficult. I think if there's any hope, it's that the pandemic's also highlighted the way these facilities treat people and shown people that they are built on a model of ableism and that it's not an accident that we see these cases of abuse and isolation and shortened lifespan in these facilities. And so hopefully this will lead to greater access to people and help us get people out and into the community and voting and in ways that we haven't been able to in the past.
And I think it's also important to use your partners. So our partners is the Arc of Mass, all of the independent living centers, and the Developmental Disabilities Council for the state. So we all work together on a regular basis to get the word out. And, you know, DLC has a Facebook page, so we post a lot of information there. that you may have relatives of individuals that may live in one of the facilities that can have that information and then share it. And then our Rev Up Mass also has a website with a great webmaster who gets the information out through emails and listservs and Facebook postings. So really bringing in that social media piece into the center of all that we do, especially now during COVID, I think it is front and center the most important piece of outreach that we're going to have this year.
I was going to say, we
give you the final remarks on this. Thanks. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. There's a lot we do, a lot I want to say, but I mean, we have a large presence in social media. We're planning to do things remotely through Zoom for our voting outreach efforts, but there are limitations, and regretfully, there's a lot of people who just don't have the technology or expertise or, know-how to get on a regular basis, and we struggle with that as an independent living sector to engage people that normally would come to our center. We're trying to engage them through remotely, and it's just difficult for a lot of people to get on. Some people are fine. Others, they're battling issues that prevent them from coming on and participating. So it's a challenge. We do our best, but it's not a substitute for actually in person.
That's super real. So we are actually out of time. I knew this conversation would go by so quickly. So one, I want to say thank you to all of our panelists and speakers for helping us work through this conversation. How do we mobilize our communities? How do we ensure that the disability vote is not just a number, but it is active, it is engaged, it is getting registered, it's voting. And so these are a couple of people that I would recommend folks get in touch with to understand what it means to mobilize. I know that they're happy to connect, so feel free to reach out to us. If you're not following #CryptTheVote, I really recommend that you do that. Shout out to Greg, Alice, and Andrew for all of your work. AAPD's Rev Up Network also recently released a digital organizing training. As was mentioned, particularly in today's times, as we're still ramping up in-person activity, it becomes more and more important that our networks are prepared on how do we digitally organize so that people are continuously involved in civic engagement. Outside of that, we've also mentioned that AAPD is just around the corner going to be hosting National Disability Voter Registration Week. We, again, strongly encourage you to get involved, mobilize with your state, with your local communities, and on a national level. So I'll make sure that we put this information in the chat box for folks that are interested in plugging into Rev Up. We encourage you to get involved with one of our state partners. If you're interested in starting a state voting coalition, we can help you with that process. So again, we'll make sure to share all of that information. Thanks for tuning in today, and I'm going to pass it back to our MCs for the next section.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Rev Up, coalitions of Texas, New York, Texas, New Jersey, Florida, and Massachusetts, as well as Greg, Andrew, and Alice from CryptTheVote, for sharing all of their experiences and wisdom. I always benefit from hearing those who are building the movement before us and with us. So these people that are shaping the movement, that are teaching us how to be better and more inclusive, brings me to a question that I feel very proud to channel my inner Derek Shields. What is mentorship in the disability community? Who is your disability mentor, and what have they done to support you? I personally can count 3 different mentors in the speaker lineup just today. So we would love to hear from you. Who is setting a great example in your eyes? Tweet us, tag AAPD, #CryptTheVote, #RevUp, #PowerDisSummit. And then kind of moving back and looking forward, As we learned from Dr. Schur and Dr. Kraus from Rutgers University yesterday, there was an 8.5 increase of the disability vote in 2018. So we're now going to look ahead to the future of increasing the disability vote for the 2020 elections. I am super happy to introduce a new acquaintance, Rashida Singh, a graduate student of Duke University Stanford School of Public Policy. Rashida has dedicated her master's research to AAPD. Additionally, she serves as the AAPD's social media coordinator and was a member of the program committee for this event. She interviewed many of the panelists included in this summit, and she will present her findings. Welcome, Rashida.
Hello. Thank you, King, for that great introduction. One second. Okay. So, as King mentioned earlier, my name is Rachita Singh. I'm a staff member at AAPD, but AAPD, like my experience at AAPD did not recently start. Through Duke Stanford School of Public Policy, I was able to intern with them last summer, and I can sincerely say it was life-changing. Not only was I able to dive into the world of disability rights and meet some amazing people, but I also really got the idea of the importance of the disability vote, voting in general, and how that needs to be emphasized way more than it is right now. And this became the center of my master's project, as Kings mentioned earlier. So I am here to present my findings on how AAPD and organizations like us can improve the disability vote and what we can do to go about increasing it. To start with, when I brought up this topic at Stanford with my advisors and professors, you could see a little bit of surprise on their faces, a little bit of unfamiliarity. This was not really a concept that they had thought about too much, especially when I mentioned that the disability group is the largest minority. And because when you think of minority, most people tend to think of race for good reason. But here I wanted to show and give some context and compare the disability population with the racial populations of the country. So as you can see, the greatest racial minority is the Black community. And compared to that, you have the disability community at 20%. So obviously the disability community encompasses all people, all voices, and all experiences. But this is not reflected in voting statistics. Based on the research that you heard about from Rutgers professors yesterday, Drs. Schur and Cruz, you can see here that the disability community has historically and consistently voted at lower numbers than people without disabilities. Even in the 2018 midterm election, where records were broken, there's still about a 5 percentage point difference between these two groups. And that translates into over 2 million people. This is a huge voting bloc that was not tapped into, that has the potential to sway elections. And this piqued my interest, made me ask the question, what can we do? So in order to answer this question, I decided to use a more qualitative approach. I wanted to center my research around stories and experiences rather than data. So to do that, I conducted 15 interviews and 3 case studies. A lot of my interviewees are actually panelists and presenters from the past couple days, such as Michelle Bishop from National Disability Rights Network, and the Rutgers professors that I mentioned earlier, Dr. Schur, Dr. Cruz, along with people outside the disability community. So, for example, Voto Latino and When We All Vote and Human Rights Campaign. I got a lot of great stories and experiences from all of these people. I also decided to focus on 3 minorities that have often been either overlooked or underestimated or, labeled as uninterested or apolitical. And these 3 groups are the Latinx population, the LGBTQ plus community, and the youth group, who all have done amazing work despite obstacles and barriers that they've experienced. To start with, through my interviews, I was, I heard, as I said, a lot of different stories and heard about a lot of different barriers that people experience at the polls that spread across different minority groups. But the 4 that came up the most were discrimination, voter suppression, voter apathy, and lack of information. Of course, these are barriers that you've probably heard a lot about in the news, social media, or articles and such. But here I was able to get a more personal point of view and more personal experiences. So, for example, Michelle Bishop from the National Disability Rights Network told me about how voter suppression is prevalent within the disability community and within minority groups through ADA and through disability laws. These laws are used as a reason to close polling places instead of improving them, and often these polling places are within minority neighborhoods. And unfortunately, this, as Michelle Bishop says, is inherently offensive to all and is used to suppress everyone's voice and affects all types of people. And to continue, I had also more discussion with the interviewees about ways that they overcome these obstacles. And all these groups are doing some amazing work and working really hard to increase voting within their respective communities. But there were 3 methods that came up the most often, which are social media, relationship building, and candidate consideration. Again, these are concepts and methods that are pretty well known, are already in play, but are important, and always necessary to emphasize. So here, for example, former AAPD President and CEO Helena Berger talked about how candidates often overlook the disability community when they're out campaigning. She quotes that candidates support your vote because you either vote in high numbers or write a lot of checks. People with disabilities might not have the money, but we do have the power and the numbers. This is something that most definitely needs to be amplified on a national level. And coming to the case studies, they really enabled me to see what different minority groups who are diverse from each other, and like I said before, can often be overlooked, what they are doing to help increase voting within their respective groups. There were a lot of methods employed, and many of them spread across the group, but there are some that were especially unique or particularly strong within each group. So with the Latinx community, there was a big focus on coalition building. Historically, in the past, many of the diverse nationalities that existed within this large group were not necessarily grouping themselves together. So, for example, people from Mexico did not necessarily identify or interact as much with people from, say, like Guatemala. But there was a point in history when this group, and these people decided that, yes, we need to come together to raise our voices, to unite and make sure that we are heard from the leaders of our nation. And this is an example that all of us can follow. With regards to the LGBTQ plus community, their kind of special and unique method is actually employed by the Human Rights Campaign. I found that they created a digital model that uses queer issues or LGBTQ plus issues and questions to target potential voters and directly reach out to them, which I found really unique, especially in this digital age. And speaking of digital organizing, we have the youth group, which they are often deemed as like stuck to their phone or don't care enough about politics, and it's actually the opposite. In the 2018 midterm election, 18 to 29-year-olds were the age group that managed to increase their political participation and their percentage points the most out of all the age groups. So clearly they are ready to get to work and ready to help get the vote out there. And a lot of this is through social media, of course. They're the group that uses social media the most and uses social pressure to get people to vote. So people in the youth group are more connected to others within their social circle. They're constantly up to date, know what each other is doing, and this is a way for them to encourage their family, friends, and coworkers to go out there and to vote. For example, me or my friends, if we voted, we'll wear our I voted sticker, put it up on Instagram, and other people will see it and hopefully get encouraged and remember to go out and vote themselves. Before I move on to the recommendations that I have based on these methods, I wanted to acknowledge the limitations within my project. So, of course, 15 interviews and 3 case studies are not enough to represent the diversity and the unique experiences within the disability community and within the nation as a whole. This is a very small group that I acknowledge that, is only the tip of the iceberg. And of course, it's important to recognize that everyone has a different voting experience and cannot necessarily be grouped together. Along those lines, the next limitation that I wanted to talk about would be intersectionality, which was a little overlooked, admittedly, in this project, and it is important to identify that existence and significance. And not, every disabled person is not only that. They have other characteristics, other traits that they identify with that affect the voting experience. Obviously, this also applies to people that are not disabled. There's just the importance of intersectionality is important, to recognize. And finally, I would like to acknowledge that the groups in this project, some of them have been given a singular label that cannot completely define them. So, for example, the Latinx population has one label, but I acknowledge that there are multitudes of identities and diverse voices within this group. So, moving on, we come to the recommendations. There, as I said, are many methods that were great, that were useful and intelligent, but 3 stood out to me for AAPD, which are relational organizing, targeted voter database, and partnerships. So relational organizing entails educating our staff and related members and making sure that they are completely trained to register, to vote, and to spread the word. If every person makes sure that every person in their social circle is ready to vote, that alone will increase our numbers. Along that line, it would be great if we could employ canvassers. I am sure that everyone has come across someone knocking on their door asking if they are registered to vote and if they're going to go to the polls. And this would be so great to apply to the disability community, to make sure that these canvassers are not just talking about voting in general, but are raising awareness about the disability vote specifically. As Jim Dixon said before, the disability community does not vote because people don't ask them to, and we definitely need to change that. For the targeted voter database, this is heavily influenced by the Human Rights Campaign and the model that I mentioned before. I think it would be great if AAPD or other disability rights organizations could do something similar and use questions important to this community, such as regarding special education or transportation, and use these questions to target, pinpoint potential voters, and then directly reach out to them. And finally, we come to my third recommendation, which is partnership. The AAPD organization is fortunate enough to have many amazing partners and sponsors, and I feel like it would be so great if we could build upon that relationship that we have and make sure that they're using their platform to talk about an issue that affects everyone and that is mutually beneficial. For example, we are lucky enough to be connected to an organization like NAACP. And if they could also include the disability community in their outreach, that would be amazing and would really help raise awareness. Along those lines, I think it would be really great if we could partner with celebrity advocates. These people have a platform, have publicity and fame that lets them be visible to the general population. So, for example, a couple years ago, the singer Taylor Swift put up a post regarding voting, and within 24 hours, there are about 65,000 new registered voters. This is amazing, and if that impact could be applied to the disability community, it would definitely change things for the better. So those are my 3 recommendations based on my personal research. And thank you for listening. I will take any questions you have, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Rashida, thank you so much for such timely and relevant information. So we have time for 2 quick audience questions before we transition into a break. So the first question, can you talk a little bit about if you've come across any strategies in reaching out to individuals with disabilities who are multi-marginalized? Because it's really, really important, as you mentioned, to recognize that we can't pit identities against one another, that we need to recognize intersecting identities. But how do we go about that voter outreach, especially to the communities of people who are disabled and multi-marginalized?
That is a great question. I think that is where the importance of partnership comes into play. I think that when people think, like I said, of minorities, of marginalization, they do often tend to focus on one group, but all groups are affected. All people need to come together and to raise voices, to just band together and recognize that voting is important no matter who you are, no matter what group you are. If you want change, you have to vote. So for people who are multi-marginalized, who are dealing with a variety of experiences that are packed upon each other, it is important that they reach out and that we reach out to them to encourage them to go to those polls, to elect leaders who will help them, who will help everyone, and who will promote the right issues and policies.
That was a fantastic answer, Rachida. I wanted to ask, we have an audience question. During the final segment of your presentation, part 3, that focused on engaging and increasing the disability vote in 2020, can you talk about specific strategies or methods to get people involved in accessible canvassing, maybe text banking, phone banking, or increasing voter turnout? Can you offer some suggestions for how the community can get involved?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously it's hard to kind of do door-to-door knocking in this environment, or it's not accessible to everyone. So I definitely would recommend translating that into either a virtual context or by phone. We have a lot of great organizations that are doing using similar methods. So, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, you can, give your phone number and they will reach out. They will text you when there are protests going on. They will text you information. I think that is a really great method that can be applied to the disability community as well, that encourages accessibility and can really help raise awareness and make sure people are up to date with information. I think that using apps such as what Voto Latino has or Outvote from When We All Vote is another way to make sure people are connected. And really it's about making sure everyone is educated and aware that they know of not only the presidential election, but of every election going on in their states, in their localities. We've heard, consistently in the past day and from yesterday and today, how important it is to vote no matter where you are, no matter what the election. And if we kind of are pushing people constantly, I think that will really help increase registration numbers.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for participating in the first part of our programming for today. Like yesterday, the next session will begin with a different link. So when you're finished with your break, please make sure to make your way to the link for day 2, part 2.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachida. Please let us know in the meantime what you found most useful or most valuable or most interesting from today so far on social media, in our chat box. We are loving your questions. We will take, like I said, a 10-minute break, and we will see you shortly. Thank you so much.